It's very lovely to have all of you with us, truly. I mean that when I say it. And I'd like to tell you who I am, because you're probably wondering at this point. My name is Judith Pucci. I am one of many Tribute Center walking tour guides. And this afternoon, with the We Were There presentation, you're going to hear stories told to you by two of my fellow guides. These stories go beyond the historic events of that day, the events that we all know well and that touched and changed all of our lives. Instead, they explore the personal costs of September 11th. So next to me are KellyJanes Cotter and Cynthia Tumulty-Ollemar. Cynthia, on September 11th, she was a retired teacher and she had two young children. Her husband, Lance, worked for a brokerage house called Eurobrokers, and they were located on the 84th floor of the South Tower. KellyJanes graduated from the journalism school at Columbia University. She has been a newspaper reporter for more than 25 years, correct? About 25 years, okay. After the attacks, KellyJanes volunteered with the Salvation Army. So you're going to get two very different perspectives this afternoon. We're going to begin with Cynthia's story, so let me just briefly set the scene for you. The North Tower was hit first, and that was at 8:46 that morning. 17 minutes separated the two attacks. So that means that the people who were in the second tower, the South Tower, they had in those 17 minutes to make very serious life and death decisions. And it really came down to, do I stay here at my desk in my office, or do I exit the building and leave? And I'm going to let Cynthia pick up the story from there.
Hi. September 11th was my 3-year-old daughter Sarah's first day of preschool. And I was getting her ready for school that morning and had my 4-month-old newborn Caroline in the high chair when the phone rang. And it was my husband Lance calling me from his office on the 84th floor of the South Tower. And he called to tell me that something, possibly a small plane, had just hit the other building, that he was fine, he loved me, and he'd call me later. And with that, I continued getting the kids ready for the morning. And I was about to walk out the door a little while later with Sarah to put her in the car to take her to preschool when I heard the news reporter scream, oh my God, it's a second plane." And I turned and I looked at the TV at that exact moment that that second plane flew into the South Tower. And my knees buckled, and they had never done that before. And I don't know what went through my head at that moment, but I put Sarah in the car, I took her to school, but not after trying to reach my husband. But there was no phone service at all, so I couldn't get through to him. We got to school, and we did all the normal things that you do on the first day of school. We met our teachers, we took those first photos, and we met the other kids. I excused myself a couple of times from the classroom to try to reach Lance again, but no luck. There still wasn't any phone service. Of course, as you can imagine, all the people there, that's all they were talking about. When school was over, we drove home, and as we were driving up the driveway, a little voice from the back seat asked, "Mommy, why are all these people at our house?" And I did what I think any mom would do in those circumstances. I lied, and I told her that they were all there to celebrate her first day of school. As I got out of the car, I was met by neighbors, friends, relatives, all wanting to know the same thing. Where was Lance? Had I heard from him? And was he okay? I still had hope at that moment that he was, because someone that he worked with on his floor at his office was standing next to me. I can only begin to describe what happened in those next few minutes, days, as controlled chaos, because everyone who came to my house took on a different role. My mom's job was to help take care of my newborn. My girlfriends took my older daughter, Sarah, places like the park and the movies. My dad and my sister-in-law, their job was to field the hundreds of phone calls coming into the house. My best friend, her job was to make missing posters with Lance's picture on them. And my job was to do something that I never thought that I would have to do at 32 years old. I had to collect his toothbrush and his hairbrush to get to the chief medical examiner for DNA. And I had to call the dentist to obtain his dental records in case that was needed for identification purposes. Lance had two older brothers, and they had the most important job. They would wake up every day and leave New Jersey, travel into the city, and canvass the city in hopes of finding out any information they could about what happened to Lance. And this went on for a few days, and after about the third day, I got a phone call that they were on their way home and that they wanted to have a meeting with me. I didn't need to have a meeting. I would know whatever it is that they needed to tell me when I saw my brother-in-law, Sean's face. I was standing in the kitchen that night when Sean came around the corner, and he looked at me, and I looked at him, and my knees buckled, and I knew that Lance wasn't coming home. What my brother-in-laws had found out was that through something called a Bloomberg, which is like instant messaging from computer to computer, Lance was standing at his desk on the 84th floor at the time and the moment of impact. When I had watched that plane crash into the building, I had watched my husband be killed. And as everyone in the house that night got word of this, we all went outside, and it was a beautiful, beautiful night. And there was music playing, and we got in a big circle, and we put our arms around each other, and we sang along to the music, and these were the words. For a moment, all the world was right. How could I have known that you'd ever say goodbye? And now I'm glad I didn't know the way it all would end, the way it all would go. Thank you.
As of today, 40 to 41% of everyone who died here at the Trade Center, their remains have not been identified. The official number of deaths of people who died here alone that morning is 2,749. So that means that that morning, a little over 1,100 people basically vanished into thin air. Lance was one of them. As extraordinary as the day itself was, the aftermath was also, in its own way, exceptional. The recovery effort took just shy, and I mean just a few days shy, of 9 months. First responders who worked on the pile put in extraordinary amount of work. But also, there were the volunteers, and they hung in just as the first responders did. To give you an example, 39,000 Salvation Army officers and volunteers worked tirelessly throughout the recovery effort, and Kelly Jane was one of them. It's yours.
The lady who trained me to become a volunteer with the Salvation Army at Ground Zero reminded me of a school marm in a children's storybook. She was orderly. She was kind, but she was no nonsense. And she was low-key until she started talking to us about the firefighters who would be coming to visit our tent at Ground Zero. Don't fall in love with them, she commanded us. These are all married men. Most of them have kids. Don't date them, don't flirt with them, don't trifle with them. They're traumatized men. Don't fall in love with them. So needless to say, that was pretty much the last thing I expected to learn when I was training for Ground Zero. And I didn't know how to respond to it. It was a little bit insulting to me that she would think that this was even a possibility. It was a little flattering to me that she even thought this was a possibility. But it was also altogether unnecessary. I too was happily married, and I had no intentions of falling in love with anybody at Ground Zero. That was not why I was going down there. But why was I going down there? Why had I volunteered to take the earliest train from Central Jersey into Manhattan and make my way all the way downtown at a time when it wasn't easy to do so? I had no experience in this before. I had no training, no skills, no physical strength of any kind. What gave me the arrogance to think that I could help in some way? And what made me so presumptuous as to think that I deserved to be there? I know that this confused some of my friends too, because they would ask me about it, especially after I started going and kept going back. "What are you doing there?" they would ask me. And I would tell them that I serve food, and I clean up food, and I greet people at the door, and I show them where the showers are and where the cots are, and I distribute gloves and hand warmers and eye drops and newspapers, and I go through big garbage bags of children's drawings, and I hang them on the wall. But I know that didn't fully answer their question. And I think I went down there because I felt small. I went down to Ground Zero in defiance of my own smallness, my essential human insignificance in the face of something that was so big. I was by no means alone in this. As Judith told you, there were thousands of people who did the same thing with the Salvation Army, with the Red Cross, and with other organizations. They came down for a day, they came down for a weekend, maybe weeks on end. But I think we all had the same motive, and that was we just wanted to help. We just wanted things to run a little bit more smoothly and do something in a tangible way to make that happen. It was kind of the least we could do. So picture me there, possibly on my very first day, in my oversized Salvation Army t-shirt that I should have worn, it would have been a good prop, and my Yankees cap, and a hairnet because I've been assigned to the food line. I'm standing there at the ready, spatula in hand, and in walk the firefighters, hungry for breakfast. I'm ready to help them, and I'm determined not to fall in love. And at first it's really easy. "What can I get you, sir?" "Eggs and pancakes, fruit salad." "Good morning, ma'am, how can I help you?" Fruit salad, pancakes, French toast, coffee's over there. I think to myself, this is not so bad. I can pretend I'm someplace else, and I can just get this job done. It's not as bad as I thought it was going to be. Until one firefighter came over and decided to kick it up a notch. "What can I get you, sir?" He doesn't look at the food. He looks right at me, and he leans over, and he says, "What did the mayo say to the refrigerator?" And I say something like, "Shut the door?" He says, "That's right, shut the door, I'm dressing." And he laughs. And so do I. And I think to myself, what kind of backbone do you need to come in from the pit at Ground Zero and come inside and crack a silly joke with a friendly stranger? Well, my friends, that did it. I fell in love. And what's more, I fell in love with all of them because it was very easy to do. Male or female, young or old, it didn't matter. I was loving them. The firefighters were like a bunch of big brothers to us. The NYPD, so upright and courtly. Everybody who came into that tent was relieved to see us. And that felt good, because that meant I really was helping, I really was doing something, and that I deserved to be there helping the city that I so adored. My fellow volunteers were very lovable too. They were also cheerful and energetic, and people came from all over. There were counselors on hand too, and they were coming in to assess the volunteers as well as the first responders. So when my time came, a lady came up to me, and she looked at me and she said, "So you're a Mets fan?" And I almost backed up, and I said, "Yankees, actually." And she was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Of course, of course. And how are you doing? How are you handling things here? Is everything going smoothly?" I said, I'm fine, thank you." And I reassured her. But as I turned away, I felt my eyes kind of tingle a little bit in sympathy with her. Because I don't know where she was from, but it had to be someplace so far away, so remote, that she could not tell the difference between the Yankees and the Mets. But here she was helping, and I really loved her for that. I had told her that it was okay, but I don't mean to make light of it, because not every day was okay, and there were a lot of hard things, and there were a lot of emotional things that we went through, of course. There was one day in the early spring when all of us volunteers were invited to what was being billed as a massive gratitude at the Ground Zero cross. There was a driving rain that day, but I really wanted to go. And when I went, I got there, and every time I bowed my head, rain just poured off my hard hat. When it came time for the sermon, the priest stepped aside, And I realized at that point that the whole point of this was to give the first responders a chance to show gratitude to us. And so they did. They stepped forward one by one and they spoke to us. And they said incredible things, and most of which kind of boiled down to your family. And they stood there crying in the rain at us. So it appears that my love did not go unrequited, and that they loved us too. And that was really nice to know, especially as the recovery efforts started winding down. We knew that it would wind down, we knew that it would end. I knew this specifically because in training, another Salvation Army person had said, this will end. But I didn't pay attention to that warning either, because my time at Ground Zero had become so important to me and so routine. I really loved it there, and I was very proud of what we were doing and proud of the place itself. It was this enormous tent over by where the North Tower was. And the first responders used to call it the Taj, like Taj Mahal. But I always liked to think of it as the bubble, because it was big and round, and I liked seeing its rounded, welcoming presence at the edge of Ground Zero, where everything else was so harsh and angular. But it did end, and my last shift came shortly before the final end. I worked weekends, so I didn't get to see the last beam carried out. I didn't get to partake in any closing ceremonies. When my time was done, it was done. I had to sign up, and I had to leave. So that's pretty much what I did. And I left the bubble, and I started walking, and as I always did, I waved goodbye to the police officers who stood guard at the fenced perimeter of Ground Zero, and I just kept going. But my chest felt really tight, and my heart felt like it needed to escape my body. So when I got about a block away, I let it escape. And then I turned around and I followed my heart all the way back to the tent. And I didn't go inside, but I reached up and I cupped my hand against it and touched it the way that you would touch a pregnant woman's belly. And I could feel all the activity that was going on inside. And when I let go, I sat down on the curb and I cried. And in all my time down there, that was the first time that I actually cried. So they were right to warn us about this will end, because it really did hurt. It was way harder to leave this place than it ever was to come here in the first place. But they need not have warned me against falling in love, because that was an inevitable part of the recovery process. Any playwright, any poet, any teenager is going to tell you that you can't prevent love, nor should you try, because love is what makes us grow, and love keeps us from being small. Thank you.